Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
All right, now I want you all to listen very carefully. Here's how you deal with this. Duck and cover. Duck and cover. That's right. That was the last time I heard that there was a potential for a hostile nation to send a nuclear warhead to the United States. We had drills in grade school. We'd get under our desks. Oh, the absurdity of it. Actually, I think we did more for tornado drills. Tornado drills, we went into the hallways. We just went under our desks for the nuclear attack that was coming. I got to say, as usual, there's been about a month's worth of news since last we spoke, which was just 24 hours ago. And this I find the most troubling, actually, the North Korea missile test. Because they launched a missile that is, in fact, capable of hitting any place in the United States. Granted, we don't know if it's capable of carrying a fully loaded bomb, which makes it a lot trickier, and also whether they can target this thing. But this is real, and there's a lunatic at the helm, and there's a lunatic at the helm in D.C. So I really think that a lot of everything else we're freaking out about, I mean, this beats Matt Lauer, okay? Now, I happened to see in the morning paper, that would be the Pittsburgh morning paper, it says this in the second paragraph. The missile was launched from Sanni, North Korea, and traveled about 620 miles before landing in the Sea of Japan. And I read that and I thought, and then it says it flew for 53 minutes. And I said, it flew for 53 minutes and it went 620 miles. Do the math. According to that, if you just take those two numbers you've been given, it was traveling at a speed of what? About 2 miles an hour? I mean, what? And it's this about reporting that just drives me nuts. If you had read only what was on the front page, you would have thought they have a missile that goes 620 miles. What the hell do I give a damn? It went all the way from North Korea into the Sea of Japan. That's what it says. North Korea launches missile into Sea of Japan. I mean, this totally does not tell the reader what that missile did. That missile was not fired this way to travel 620 miles. That missile was fired straight up. And amazingly, it went 10 times higher than the International Space Station. It blew past the International Space Station, woo-hoo, and kept going and going and going and going. 2,500 miles straight up in the air. I mean, that blew me away because I thought, the International Space, it made the International Space Station, which I always thought seemed like it was very far away up there in space. You had to take, you had to fly on rockets to get to it. And it's only, what? A few hundred miles above the Earth. It's nothing. This thing, thousands. So I must say, I do find that daunting. I do. I also find daunting the fact that these Republican senators are starting to fall in line in regard to the so-called tax plan. I mean, everything these Republicans have come up with is such a bunch of cobbled together gobbledygook, which, when given a serious scrutiny, is a pile of crap, even from a conservative Republican point of view. These are dangerous times in so many ways. And the president, who's unhinged already, is becoming increasingly unhinged, apparently, now has taken to, behind closed doors, letting certain people know, including senators, that wasn't him on the Access Hollywood tape. Also letting certain senators know that he really does not believe Barack Obama was born in the United States. Also telling senators behind closed doors that he believes he won the election now by more than 3 million votes, and that so here's a guy who is now pulling back into his carapace. Is that how that's pronounced? It is? It could be carapace. It's one of those words, you see, you read, and you say carapace. And you never bother to know if that's because you didn't think you'd ever use it, but for some reason it popped into my head. So he's huddled back in under his shell and gone to the comfort. It's like, it's like Pigpen with his blanket and and a pacifier. He's gone to these memes that are false, totally false, but that give him solace and comfort. Barack Obama wasn't an American, his birth, and I didn't say that, even though he's on record, on video, audio, the whole thing, saying I did say that, and that's not who I am, or something to that effect. He has admitted that was the capacity of somebody to lie, like he does not suggest, it screams a pathological condition. This man truly is not fit to hold any job, let alone the presidency of the United States. And wow. But the Republicans are hanging on to him because they are in awe of what he did. They're in awe of the fact that with his lies and his bluster and his vulgarity, that despite all of it, he won the presidency of the United States, bearing their banner. And they don't quite get it, but man, they're going to ride it as long as they can. So I'm wondering that if they manage to pass this tax bill, which is the biggie, that's what they really want, to pay back their donors, get the gazillionaires a few more gazillions, that once they do that, maybe they will be more willing to turn on Trump. I don't know. It is very difficult, is it not, to not be dispirited. And yet, getting dispirited plays into the hands of these people that would literally sacrifice this nation and its potential greatness for filthy lucre directed at people who don't need it, while starving others of access to health care, education. It's evil that is happening here. And it's happening at such a pace that it's hard to keep getting your dukes back up. You know, as I told you sort of yesterday, I'm sort of slumped against the ropes right now. I mean, I'll get a second wind, but the damage that is being done is mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing. And so we go off running now, Matt Lauer and Savannah Guthrie making the almost bursting into tears, saying how much she loved him, and now she's in this horrible... why is it it's always the women that are left to, like say, I don't know, guys. I do not know. I do have one other... I did find a light thing for us. I'm just going to go through the terror stuff first, and then we can head off into something lighter. So hang in there. Maybe I should have done it right now. Anyway, I just got to... Here's Dorothea. When you opened the show saying, here's how you deal with this, duck and cover, I thought you were referring to either Matt Lauer... Well, that's true, too. Or Trump's anti-Muslim tweets this morning. Then I thought perhaps you were generally referring to the past 12 months. I've been doing duck and cover since November 9th of last year. Yeah. But, the ratcheting up of the potential of nuclear war, a nuclear exchange, is... that really trumps all the other stories, if you ask me. Not that anybody did, but it does. And boy, do I feel for the South Koreans and anybody else in that vicinity right now. They must be terrified. They must be terrified. Whoa. So, I watched a movie last night. And I guess I'd never seen it. Woody Allen stars in it, but he doesn't, it's not his movie, which is unusual since it was released in 1976 and he already had produced, directed, written a lot of big movies himself. So that he did this movie as just an actor, I thought was interesting. And it was a perfect part for him. It was a movie called The Front. And in it, he plays a guy who fronts scripts, television scripts, for blacklisted writers in the 50s. Writers who were deemed to be communist sympathizers or who were seen at a May Day parade back in 1935 or something like that. That was enough. People being called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And these guys couldn't get work anywhere. So he agreed to have his name put on the stuff. Now, the movie was funny and terrifying at times and poignant, because it really showed the damage that was done in the 50s. And it showed the terror in so many creative circles in America then. And it shows the governmental entities pressured by right-wing politicians into throwing academics out onto the street, directors, writers, actors, anybody. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people lost their jobs. It was sort of like book burning. Sort of like book burning. And as I watched it, I realized, wow, I was alive then. So I lived through this McCarthy era in which the United States looked like it was heading into fascism. Again, in response to an enemy who was made much more frightening than, in fact, it really was, I suspect. But the witch hunts and the ruined lives and the fact that it ends up being based on lies. McCarthy. I have in my hand a paper with a list of hundreds of communist infiltrators in the very government of the United States. Well, we've been here before. And there was very little pushback. People were scared to death. But I thought as I was watching this, wow, we've been kind of here before. And we always end up here in these terrifying times where we turn our back on our principles, on our founding principles, on our personal principles, where we turn our back, led by lying, fear-mongering Republicans. Why do we keep doing this? Because there's a huge hunk of America that are always willing to fall in line and march behind them. So I don't know that 1950 America is any different than 2017 America. It is in things like social media, but you see the cast of characters, the people, are behaving as they have behaved historically. And I'm talking about Republicans. And I'm talking about the frightened people who vote for them. And the collateral damage of good people's lives and of the principles, the founding principles of this nation. So this movie blew my mind. And then at the end of it, when the credits rolled, it turned out that much of the cast and the director and the writer had all been blacklisted. Really. So The Front is a movie directed by Martin Ritt, who was blacklisted during the McCarthy era and unable to work. Martin Ritt, who was a wonderful, and this movie shows it too, wonderful director, who, after he finally got back, gave us Norma Ray, gave us HUD, unbelievable. Zero Mostel had a big role in it. He best known perhaps for his role as the first, was he the first fiddler? He was certainly the first in the producers. But brilliant, brilliant actor who essentially sort of played himself, I guess, then in the movie. But as I watched the movie, I wasn't aware that I was watching people tell their own story, a fictionalized, very real, sort of docudrama-like account. I recommend the movie highly if you can find it, The Front. It was on TCM, so if you got on demand, I guess you could get at it. So we've been here before, guys. And sometimes we sort of recover. They not only had a blacklist back then, they had a gray list, which meant that any accusation, any rumor, anything could get you canned. So people were taken down left and right. Everybody was frightened for their lives, so they were naming names so they wouldn't be blacklisted. That was the only way out. And as you know, a lot of people in Hollywood showed themselves to be cowards, and others showed themselves to be heroic. I knew one such man. It's a complicated story, that it does involve sexual harassment of the highest order. But he also was a blacklisted actor during the McCarthy era who had been called before the House Un-American Activities Committee and had shown me the transcript of his testimony, and it made me fall in love with him. Because he sort of did this to him. He was a young actor, and it ended everything. He didn't come back in able to act until 1970, like 1970. And I was there. I've told you the story maybe. I was there when he got the call. And he got a call from Norman Jewison, who is a Academy Award-winning director, producer. And Norman Jewison said, Paul, I think it's time you were brought back in from the cold. People's lives were Norman Jewison was about to shoot Fiddler on the Roof. And he cast my friend as, for the first time in so long, gave him a movie. Cast him as Laser Wolf, the Butcher. And then today, after watching that movie last night, being reminded that we've been here before. This morning, obituary in the New York Times. Vera Schlackman, never heard of her, dies at the age of 108. Vera Schlackman, fired in Red Scare. So here, after seeing that movie, here is one of the survivors. Must be one of the last survivors, because they're old now. They're really old. And here she is. And she was an influential professor at Queens College. And when she got called before a Senate investigatory committee, this was like, God, this was like the Inquisition. And this was American government turning its back on everything that it purported to be. And she pretty much did what my friend Paul did. And that was the end of it. She was fired immediately, less than 24 hours later from Queens College, and she was unemployed. You become a pariah. She wrote a groundbreaking book in 1935 on women working in factories, female factory workers. Yeah, it sounds like a commie to be thinking about, oh, let's look at the conditions for women on the factory floor. Sounds like a lefty, doesn't it? Anyway, it blew my mind that here was just another life damaged. She worked as then a bookkeeper. Eventually, she and 11 other of her professorial cohort at Queens, who were also thrown out onto the streets, were apologized to, their pensions reinstated. But as with Paul, it came usually 15, 16 years later, after their lives were totally thrown off track and all the work they could have done destroyed. I say all this because, guys, we've been here before. And what it tells me is that what we are seeing is very American. That Trump's base is very much a part of America. Has been for, I guess, ever. So I don't think we should be so shocked. The longer you live, I guess you see these cycles, and they repeat and repeat and repeat. And that's what the more hopeful members of the audience are clinging to. As someone said, I think yesterday, that the pendulum has swung so far to the right now. And we know that now there will be a resulting pushback. But so that's what we do. We go this way, and then we go that way. And then somewhere in the middle is a maybe 10, 15-year period of relative normalcy. But we ain't going to see that in a long, long time. Okay, I will get to what you guys want to talk about here. Ansel writes, Lynn, Trump by all measures is unhinged, but there's a special place in hell for people who justify and support his unhinged antics. I agree with you. It's one thing for him, who we knew was wholly incompetent, incapable, and unqualified to be the president of the United States before he ever was elected. It's the people who knew it and still pushed his candidacy, putting our nation in jeopardy. It is the people who continue knowing his inability, knowing the danger he presents, who continue to prop him up for their own gain. And you are right. Those enablers are worse than he. I do believe that. Now, Ansel points to Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Mitch McConnell. How can the people so close to this president continue to turn their heads and look the other way? It makes me sick. Well, they can do it forever. They've made their calculation. And this is how they're playing it out. And you're reacting because you're still holding certain principles in your heart, in your head. And so you can't believe what you're seeing. But they maybe never had those principles in their hearts and heads. Excuse me, they had a different set of principles, which were about power, and only about power. Beth writes, I heard yesterday the Time magazine is considering either Colin Kaepernick or Donald Trump as Person of the Year, which Beth says are both poor choices. It should be the year of the white man. After all, they are the ones that have done the most damage to our society this past year. And she recounts white men should be the men of the year. The mass shootings in Las Vegas, in California, and all the others, white men. The sexual harassment we're now reveling in some respects, white men. The KKK Nazi rallies, white men. Trump election and his white male rhetoric. Majority of police, white men. And I'm sure I'm forgetting. Oh, yeah, I mean, many other. All you have to do is look at his cabinet and all the damage each and every one of them are doing. White men, white men. The Republicans we're talking about, overwhelmingly white men. It's a provocative idea, Beth. In some respects, very, very defensible. But it ain't gonna be. That would require too much self-evaluation, because who do you think makes this choice? What's your bet? A bunch of white men? That'd be my bet, too. Beth writes, I know throughout my lifetime it has been white men day, every night, but this year was the year where white men felt afraid. And thus, President Trump. Hopefully we'll be able to get Pandora's box closed again. No, see, the thing about Pandora's box, you can't close it. Or you can, but it doesn't matter. Fine, close it. Everything in it is no longer in it. It's escaped. It's out. So closing the box doesn't do a thing. The damage is done. Roger writes, I guess we're just going to be... We'll just have women journalists? Yesterday's topic about not talking about victims' possible culpability is even more important today. Men who get their news from right-wing sources are calling this political correctness going nuclear and will continue to accuse women and the feminazis. We need to stand firm and start holding men accountable and cautioning parents of boys. Biology and parents are the problem. Dads especially must work with their sons about reining in urges and, most importantly, be leaders by example and not coddle and make excuses for bad behavior. They're up against so much. This culture is so huge. Look at our culture. Look at what Hollywood puts out now. It's all heavily sexualized and heavily brutalizing violence. Isn't that? Did I just define most Hollywood movies now? So, it's hard to raise a good kid in this environment. Roger goes on, my wife was working in a Cranberry home and was talking to an upper-class mom of an Ivy League college son who laments the difficulty her white son will have in this modern working world when he graduates. WTF. Yeah. Yeah, so the rich woman in Cranberry whose son is already at an Ivy League college and miles ahead of most Americans, who obviously has had all the advantages, and she's wringing her hands because she thinks he's going to be somehow victimized. Well, There's your Trump voter. Moms are a problem, too. Humans are a problem. I'm seeing this. Chuck writes, my biggest tax deductions are my mortgage interest, my local taxes, and the college loan that I took out for my daughter. All of these are on the chopping block. So let's call this tax plan what it is. This tax plan is just a tax cut for the rich, and the rich will take this tax cut at the expense of the deficit. For 8 years, Paul Ryan's been preaching the evils of the deficit, but now, no, they're shameless, and they have outed themselves as not even hewing to the principles they have been preaching ad nauseum for decades. They will abandon their own principles in a nanosecond. They're something. They really are something. Milton says 1950 is not now. Oh, I mean, I know there are differences, but let's hear what you have to say. The ominous difference between McCarthyism in the 50s and the jingoistic myopia of today's Republican Party is that back then, in the 50s, the electorate shared common knowledge about what America was and what it stood for. Because history and civics were taught to all school-age children, even when the Red Scare ran rampant, there was a general underlying idea that this McCarthyism was not what we as a nation were about. Yeah, but did you see how easily everybody folded, acquiesced out of fear? Yes, we've been here before. But what is uncharted territory is that we now find ourselves drifting further and further right, with no common center to which to return. Without those lessons of who we are and were and where we came from, being taught to children from a young age, many cannot be appealed to now. They cannot be appealed to return to a more common center. They don't know that common center. I fear that we will continue to be divided because so very many are ignorant about those ideals which used to unite us. Those virtues we return to after McCarthyism simply aren't shared by enough of us. Point taken. Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left. Can I do this thing that has nothing to do with any of these horrors which we have just discussed? I saw this on Twitter yesterday, and I need you to take part, or this won't work. So get ready to email me or quick calls. You don't have to make a big call. Just answer this question, okay? What is something that you remember that if you told it to a younger person, they literally wouldn't understand what you're talking about? Because there are so many things like that. I mean, it's not that they necessarily wouldn't understand. They'd be, as they say in Britain, gobsmacked. So, here's a potential answer. When I was a kid and well into, actually, after I was even married, because I remember one night having to sit up all night, and there was no television, because TV used to end every night. I mean, it'd go off the air, I guess usually about midnight, sometimes after the news, or if there was a late show like The Tonight Show, and then it would go off the air. Usually it would play the Star-Spangled Banner, and there'd be a picture of a flag flying, and then it would just go to the, I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's just, it's the holding pattern for video, and there was just static. And there were only 3, maybe 4 channels, and they all went out. So that at night, until the morning, like maybe 6 a.m., there was no television. So we're talking about the 50s and the 60s, and even into the 70s. That was true. So there's one, which for anybody under the age of 30 is like, what? What? And of course, there were no videos. You couldn't. And I'll tell you something. You know what more people did then? Because there was not that kind of, there was no distractions like that. You were sitting in a dark house, and there was no distraction of video. So you could, I guess, listen to music on your record player, or you could read. And I think we used to read. And I think we were smarter in many ways. I don't know. Okay, so am I going to do this whole thing? Okay. I remember my son. I have a black old Ma Bell rotary phone. It weighs a ton, solid as a rock, built to do service for hundreds and hundreds of years. Indestructible. It's like a big black cockroach. And I still have it. And I have used it. And it's been a godsend in some ways, because when everything goes out, if you lose electricity or something, that phone actually still works. But my son, when he first saw it, looked at it like it was a relic from, it could have been a Mayan excavation, because he said, "Is that a phone?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "How does it work?" He literally did not know how a dial phone worked. And when I showed him, he was blown away, just blown away. And when he tried to dial his number, I said, dial your number. And he had trouble doing it. I said, no, you got to go all the way around, and it has to hit that little silver thing. And then you have to wait till it goes all the way back. And then you have to do it again. So you're reminded of how long it actually took to make a telephone call, to actually input the number. I just want to say, in response to the question of what's something you could tell a younger person that they would say, what? I would add, no one ever walked a dog. And certainly no one ever picked up their poop. You never walk dogs. You open the door and let them out. We have a call. Caller, hello.
Hi, Lynn. I was just calling with something I remembered that maybe doesn't happen anymore.
Okay.
I was a big fan of Muhammad Ali, and I was also a big radio listener.
Yes.
And I remember sitting in the house with my back leaned up against the radio console unit and listening to the prize fights on the radio. And I don't think that's probably, they don't even put prize fights on the radio anymore.
No, I don't. I would assume that there is no just radio, of a prize fight anymore. And wasn't it, compelling, and you felt like you were there?
Yeah, I guess it's your imagination,
right,
that kind of takes over.
Right.
but the guys that did that they painted a picture,
right?
With their words, and yeah, for me as a young kid, it was absolutely fascinating stuff. So,
thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Bye. Oh, I was a fan of Ali's too. Oh, wow. Back in the day, you got lost a lot. Your only hope was having a map. GPS didn't exist, and I mean, you asked for directions. See, nobody asked that. The thing we always used to say is men won't ask for directions. Ask a woman if that's not true. And now women aren't going to know that about men, nor men about themselves, because everybody has their GPS. No one had heard of sushi, and the very idea that someone would eat raw fish would be like, what the hell? And that you would eat it and love it and pay lots of money for it. Girls used to go to bed with Coke cans on their head with their hair wrapped around it. Try sleeping like that. Or even worse than the Coke cans were those prickly kinds of rollers that you would put on so that to lay your head on a pillow was to experience pain. But that was because we didn't have access to the kind of grooming crap that we have now. Milton says, how about busy signals on telephones? You don't hear them very much, do you? You can. Or pop music without music videos. Or how about the Encyclopedia Britannica? Every home aspired to have a dictionary. I mean, an encyclopedia set. My family had the World Book, I think it was, not Britannica. How about when garbage men came all the way around your house and picked up your garbage from wherever it was behind the house and dragged it out, right? These are all from Milt. There was no such thing as answering machines. There was no such thing as talking Christmas trees. Thank God. No microwave popcorn. Well, no microwave. Chuck says, as my daughter registered online for her upcoming spring semester, I explained to her how I registered for classes way back in 1980. She was blown away when I explained how nearly every student on campus would line up outside the convocation center, some sleeping out overnight, and they would manually assemble their schedules on paper. Every college in the university had a table, and you would wander from one table to another, signing up for classes. Some professors who had trouble filling a class would come up with creative ways to attract you to their table, such as plates of cookies. Today, my daughter clicks one button, and her schedule is created. Aaron, lots of things we used to use in the office in the 80s, 90s would get a laugh, I'm sure. Yeah, I was mentioning carbon paper the other day, which was because I was a secretary. And yeah, if you wanted copies, you often did carbon paper while making the original. And man, that required you couldn't make a mistake. The minute you made a mistake, you were dead. That was scary. Yeah, all the stuff we used, right. When I was a legal secretary, they got the new IBM Selectric typewriter. And this thing did stuff that was mind-blowing. It would set margins in ways that, and you could go back and I mean, things that other typewriters never had done. And it was almost like, my reaction to it was almost like, the first time I saw a computer. Yeah. Denise writes, I remember adults borrowing $20 from friends or neighbors over the weekend until the bank opened on Monday. Right. No ATMs. Wow. I remember that a woman couldn't have a credit card. Roger said, remember, we got a morning newspaper and we got an evening newspaper delivered to the house. Oh, yeah. Well, this isn't making anybody feel any better, is it? Is it? Do you know what? In Wisconsin, you couldn't buy margarine. It was against the law. So we started, when we went down to Illinois, to Chicago, we would buy margarine sometimes and smuggle it back across the state line up to Green Bay. Eventually, they did let margarine come in, but it didn't look like butter. It was packaged in, it was a big cellophane-ish plastic thing of white stuff. And you could get it in the refrigerator aisle, and it had this big red dot in the middle of it. And what you would have to do is, I guess you pressed on the dot, and the dot released not red dye, but some kind of a dye. And then you would knead and knead and knead that bag to make the margarine look more like butter. But it was still this disgusting congealed mass in this big bag. So it wasn't a stick of butter. And that was before there was anything like a tub of anything. Yeah, times were different. Remember when long distance was like so expensive that when somebody went away, you didn't talk to them for months and months. And people then, and this is how I think young people who left the family and went off somewhere to college, they really were on their own pretty much. There was none of the, even if a parent wanted to be one of these helicopter parents we have now, pretty damn hard, because no one was expected to keep in touch. I think the general thing was you called your parents on Sunday and you had a pretty quick conversation, because your father was always going to say, this is costing money, if I started talking about something that was not of immediate import. So, I mean, make no mistake that the way we lived then created different kinds of people and behaviors. And the speed with which the technology is changing our behaviors and our expectations, such as we now expect everything to be immediate. We're expected to always be in touch. When we're not in touch, we get anxious, and people who care about us get anxious. That didn't used to be. And we were better off for that, without a doubt. You could get lost. You could be unavailable. You could disappear for a while. There was no phone on you. Those were the good old days. Just saying, I think. All right, we got some other stuff. Jonathan is saying The Front, the movie I was telling you about, is streaming on TCM's excellent website until December 6th. So that's not long. That's another week. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful film, and I had never seen it. And stay for the credits. Oh, yeah, Dorothea. Lynn, I worked in an advertising office back in the 60s, and everybody smoked. And most executives had full bars in their office. I, too, worked at an advertising agency in 1970. And a biggie, Foot, Cone, and Belding in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. And it was, it was exactly like Mad Men. It was exactly like Mad Men. Sex, drugs, rock and roll. Everybody smoked. Okay, that's right. Lynn writes, telephone party lines. Can you imagine? I just have the vaguest memory from when I was very young of picking up a phone and hearing our neighbor talking to somebody and then understanding I was supposed to hang up because the phone was in use. Key punch cards for computer programs. Right. The purpose of the TV test pattern was to adjust the screen, also vertical and horizontal hold buttons on a television. Yeah, something we don't have anymore. Yeah. Oh my, Henry says we had a milkman. Yeah, we did too. Ours was called, the local dairy was Delwich. And my brother, when he was like 1 or 2, actually was in a ad in the paper. He had a happy, smiling, my brother as a baby. And I think the line under it was, Billy Miller drinks Delwich. Yeah, well, you all had, didn't your house have a little, like in our garage, there was a little door, and that's where the milk went. We also had a World Book set, and we bought it from a door-to-door salesman. Exactly. My mother once bought a sweeper from a door-to-door salesman, and he came in and demonstrated the product by dumping dirt on our carpet, right? You remember that because it was so horrible. My God, look what he just did. And then he magically made it disappear, right? Wow. And you know, it's interesting. Like, one thing that hasn't changed is that, let's say, plumbers, electricians, repairmen, they still have Monday through Friday hours, as if someone is at home to let them in. And we don't live like that anymore. And there has been, as far as I can tell, no willingness to adopt, not much, to the fact that there's not a little woman at home. That the little woman's out working. And so if you say something's going to be delivered between 8 and noon, that the little woman has to not go to work. And sometimes that is absolutely not possible. So I've always been blown away that the service industry, where that has to have access to your house, has not created essentially a nighttime model. That would make sense, would it not? When you know the people who need the electrician, who need the plumber, who need the delivery are home because they're not working. Why don't we have that? Why do we continue? Just like, why do we still do summer vacation? As we talked about this before, because that came about because the farmers needed the kids to help on the farm. It's interesting how you get used to something and then nothing much changes. And Mark writes, this is on a different thing. Like Roger Ailes and Matt Lauer, I am a journalism grad from Ohio University in Athens. Fortunately, I will not have to join them in walking the plank, so I'm very much an unknown. By the way, if you don't like sexual misconduct, stay away from the military. Yeah. Speaking of journalism, a great job by the Washington Post with the Project Veritas woman. Hey, did you see where she was living? Did you see the latest on that? The woman who was lying, trying to sell the Post on an absolute false accusation against Roy Moore. She was living in an Airbnb basement of the guy who used to be the communications director of the Democratic National Committee. So she had access to his house. And don't think for a moment that Veritas didn't make sure and doesn't try to place their people in those kinds of situations, flying under the radar where they can pick up all kinds of information. What a bunch of scum. You are absolutely right on the tax bill. Yeah, I call it the donor boner bill. It helps only very wealthy people at the expense of the rest. There will be no trickle down, and everyone knows it. We only need a handful of Republicans to have integrity, but that seems to be apparently too much to ask. The Tea Party left with the Obamas. Well, they're now Trump's base. They're not Trump's base and they don't care. Remember when doctors made house calls, says Dave. Oh, do I? Dr. Sullivan or Dr. Milson would come with their black bags, and you'd lay there in your bed and they would tend to you there. I remember when I realized that you mean doctors now, you have to, when you're sick as a dog, you have to go to the doctor? When you're sick as a dog? And here's our last one, I think, because we're out of time. Aaron writes, smoking at your desk at work, or smoking on a train, or smoking on a bus or an airplane. Wow. Oh, yeah. Back in the day. It's a wonder we aren't all dying of lung cancer. I mean, seriously. Because just the amount of secondhand smoke that we, even if you didn't smoke, unbelievable. We all stunk of smoke. Incredible. And we didn't know it because everybody did. All right. Well, it was just a little respite, if you didn't mind. And I'm glad. I suspect you didn't. And thank you so very much. And I'll be back tomorrow. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.